Today, both the feminist movement and the men's rights movement are currently in full swing. Neither movement has the best reputation right now, but both have been going on for longer than you might think.
Do you think that men and women should have equal rights?
I do believe men and women should have equal rights because women's rights have been oppressed for so many years, and we are all human beings, so there's not really a big difference between men and women, so why do the rights have to be different?
I do think that they should because we're all equal at the end of the day, and I see no reason why we shouldn't have equal rights. In my belief, of course, and I think that's the true basis of feminism, and that's where a lot of people get misconceptions about it. I definitely believe that men and women should start on an equal platform in all regards. You shouldn't discount one gender for one thing and one gender for the other, and that goes with men too. Men shouldn't be discounted for things, and women definitely shouldn't.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that men and women should have equal rights, not like feminism shouldn't be about women being better than men. It should be about women being equal to men.
Of course, they should have equality under the law. Of course, there are biological differences, and men and women are different, and that's okay. But even though they're different, there should be equality under the law. Everyone should be treated equally under the law, like no matter what the natural behaviors are, or whatever. No special treatment at all.
Early 1800s and earlier, women were either property or borderline property. This was the norm for hundreds of years in our society. Women couldn't vote, say their opinions truthfully, or even leave the house without permission. They couldn't truly choose who to marry, and, above all, they were simply seen as baby-making, house-cleaning machines. Feminism and the fight for women's rights has had several waves throughout the years. The first wave of feminism was the women's suffrage movement, which started in 1848, New York. For about 50 years, it was led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who pressured Congress to give women more rights. In the early 20th century, the movement focused more on trying to give women the right to vote. The movement split into two groups: the National American Women's Suffrage Association, led by Carrie Chapman Catt, and the National Women's Party, led by Alice Paul. Finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, granting women the right to vote. Second-wave feminism began in response to many women being forced from the workplace when men came home from World War II. Because so many men were away at war during World War II, women had to join the workforce in their stead. Many women wanted to have more freedom in choosing to work once they had experience in what it was like. However, women did not take serious action until after the civil rights movement started. That serious action was the feminist movement of the late 1970s, which was very much focused on passing the Equal Rights Amendment Bill. The ERA bill was a proposed amendment seeking to end the legal distinctions between women and men in cases like divorce, employment, and other matters. It was important to any woman who wanted to work for herself. The National Organization of Women were boycotting states that did not want to pass the ERA bill, but they still fell 3 states short of having the ERA amended into the Constitution.
What is your opinion on the feminist movement?
I like it. I'm all for it, though I think equality is better, and if women just took over the world, it would be like how it was in the 18th century, just with women instead of men, and that's not fair to men.
I feel like it's really important, especially with all of the Me Too movements going on right now, and just trying to support that, and that women aren't objects, they're people, and I feel like expressing that is really important. I believe that when the feminist movement initially started, that I was definitely on board with it. Of course, I believe in women's rights, but I think there's definitely some people, like the extremists, that probably make it seem like bad to others. Like if you were just to see women like being rude to men and saying like, you shouldn't do this, like you shouldn't ever hold a door open for a woman, you should never be a gentleman. Like I think that definitely makes people think it's more extreme than it is, when it's really just on the basis of equal rights for a lot of things, and men can still be gentlemen and women can still be like super muscular, men can be weak. Like it shouldn't be like very, very extreme. It should just be equal treatment across the board.
Yeah, the feminist movement has, I mean, at the beginning it was a very good thing. Some people have taken it a little too far though, with like, as Jordan was saying, like making everything, every single comment, every single thing that men do sounds sexist, which is not what feminism should be about.
Seems like the feminist movement has become a bunch of like anti-men things and pushing stuff like the wage gap. I mean, the wage gap has been disproven several times. Because the actual wage gap is 98 cents to the dollar, because the study that says 75 cents to the dollar actually doesn't take into account job position, hours worked, or like vacations and stuff like that, as well as just being more likely to be or a stay-at-home mom than men.
During the 1960s, many social movements started, spurred on by previous movement successes. The men's rights movement was no exception. The men's rights movement wanted to stop feminism and gain rights for men, such as erasing current disadvantages in divorce cases and domestic violence cases. The men's rights movement died out in the 1970s. However, it has since been revived in the late 2000s, early 2010s, thanks to the widespread use of the internet. The current largest men's rights movements are all on the internet. There are two different branches of the men's rights group, and they're commonly known as simply anti-feminist or pro-feminist. The more public and upstanding men's rights movement are the pro-feminist group, being much more politically correct in their language and beliefs. The pro-feminist group advocates for as much equality as feminists, wanting domestic custody equality, being equal in the eyes of the law, and the removal of the stereotype that men cannot show emotion. This group's stance on feminism differentiates them from the anti-feminist group, the more radical groups like the incel and red pill communities. Those groups are based on male supremacy, advocating for the removal of women's privileges and the other subjugation of women. Both of the men's rights movement groups are against circumcision, though, because of its mutilation to their genitals. Protests have been held against circumcision, where men and supporters alike walk the streets wearing a distinct outfit of complete white with a blood-red circle over their crotch. Because these movements are almost all online, they do not host as many in-person events as feminism does. One of the most recent in-person meetups was the 4th International Conference on Men's Issues on July 2018, London. The event was hosted by Mike Buchanan, founder of the anti-feminist political party Justice for Men and Boys.
What is your opinion on the men's rights movement?
I think it's great. There's so much oppression for men and toxic masculinity that they don't get the help they needed or need, and they should not feel like they're going to be judged. If they need help, they should get it.
I personally think it's kind of stupid and useless because men, since really the dawn of time, have just been controlling everything, and I think it's time for there to be just some equal rights, and there doesn't need to be a men's movement.
So back to what I said about equal rights across the board, I think that men and women shouldn't be discounted for one thing or another. Like, men should be allowed to show emotions without being considered weak, and men should be allowed to wear whatever they want. They shouldn't be like, oh, you're wearing pink, oh my gosh, you're so gay. Like, that, it shouldn't be like such harsh stereotypes for both. I definitely don't think that there should be a ton of emphasis on men's rights movement because they've had the power for a long time, and now the spectrum's kind of like starting to equalize. But
yeah, I think I feel like men might feel like they are not being seen because so many people are so obsessed with women's rights, and men are like, well, I need rights too. And they have definitely been superior for all of like centuries. But yeah, I feel like some parts of the men's rights movement is reasonable. Like, yes, they should be equal to women. They shouldn't be like criticized for doing things that women would do. But at the same time, I feel like prioritizing women's rights is better because women don't have as equal rights as men do.
It seems like a lot of them are complaining and like way too much. Like, they're all talking about how they should be allowed to show their emotions and just a bunch of tons of stuff like that. Like, kind of something about, like, I guess cultural biases against them, about like not being able to show fear or like weakness or anything, which I think is completely stupid. Like, what, like, men are just naturally more masculine, and they should be like, that's just how it should be. Like, if you're gonna complain, like, you should be able to be whoever you want to be, and people should be able to think whatever they want of you. And how to explain it? Like, I kind of got jumbled up in it and went on.
Despite the names, both the men's rights and the feminist movements are about feminism. The conditions leading up to the feminist movement was continuously disregarding giving women power and choice, making men always the leaders of society. The men's rights movement was a response to the feminist movement, a reactionary movement, and thus started at around the same time, a little after. Because the feminist movement took away the absolute power men had over women, men naturally reared up in defense. The feminist movement did end up succeeding in the goals set by the second wave, because we now live in a country where women can reach the same goals and have the same opportunities as men. Today, women's rights are at an all-time high. While some countries still have very sexist laws against women, the whole Western world is very women-friendly. As the women's rights movement gained growing popularity over the years, more things were accomplished quicker. Subsequently, the movement has since lost some of the intensity and passion that fueled the first and second wave feminists to fight for rights. However, while the feminist movement is starting to slow down, the men's rights movement is just picking up steam. Even though men have been the dominant sex for most of human history, their problems are still problems. Neither of these movements have reached their ultimate goals. Nothing is set for either party. They're different in lots of ways, and their stories are just as different. But both these movements have hope for their perfect world, no matter how much that conflicts with the other groups.